confrontation between the two different ethnic groups, Serbians and Albanians, there still remains. And as a result, the UN has established a principle, the standard before status. And we are still struggling to establish a certain standard, certain level of democracy and human rights before we decide what sort of status we should give to the Kosovo. And the economic situation is still very bad. So the Kosovo has not been quite successful yet. Now, in case of Afghanistan, I should say we are on the road toward success. Recently, we had the presidential election, and quite a number of Afghanistan people registered and went to the voting. And I think that should be the first step toward a new and democratic state in Afghanistan. We are very pleased with the development. In the most recent case of Iraq, as you know very well, the security situation is still very fluid, but the people have been working very hard for the election to be held in January. If the election will be taken place as scheduled, I think that will have a great impact on that. So on the one hand, we can congratulate on the success, but on the other hand, there are a lot of things we have to take into considerations. Now, what are the problems for those cases where we have not been able to succeed? Well, there might be many reasons, but I think the most important element for the success I mean to move the society in the conflict to the post-conflict society on a stable basis. The most important element is the ownership of people in that area, in that country. So if the people are united, although their current situation is not very good, but if people are united, they have the sense of ownership of their own countries, and if they make effort to try to develop their country in cooperation with other fellow citizens, I think that would give the very firm basis for the nation building. Certainly the international community can help those people, but unless there is the ownership on the part of the people in that country, the outside help will be very much wasted. So the country where the people are united, where the people have the sense of ownership of their own country, the assistance from outside, including the assistance from the United Nations, will be very, very effective. Whereas the country where the people are divided among themselves, if the people have no idea of their own, on the future of the country, if the people don't share the sense of ownership of their own country, if the people only consider very small tribal or the small group among themselves, the outside helpers would have a lot of difficulties. That's my feeling.
Yes, but how we know the problem in Iraq?
Yeah.
And the problem is exactly what you have identified, namely that coordinated ownership is not clear.
No.
How do you deal with a situation like that? Because after all, in the past, this country did have coordinated ownership, and our efforts at peace building are creating a divided ownership. How do we resolve this problem?
Well, right now, including Japan, we have been working for the political process in Iraq. And when I say political process, that includes the election to be held in January. If that election takes place, and if the election is participated by a large number of the Iraqi people, and if they are successful in electing their leaders and the government, I think in that way the Iraq will have the responsible and acceptable authority there. And once they are successful in establishing the acceptable authority in that country, I think the people will have a better basis to be united around that. So right now we have been placing a lot of emphasis on implementing the election as scheduled, and certainly it's a difficult process. but United Nations had right now the effort by the United Nations is centered on the smooth implementation of the elections, and my country, for example, are also supporting very much to help the UN effort in making the smooth preparations for the election to take place.
One small question before I pass on the microphone to Ambassador Farhadi. What is Japan's interest in all this? Iraq is so far from Japan. It's not part of the Far East. It's not part of the Pacific Rim. What is your interest in Japan, in Iraq?
Well, I can give you the answer in a very general way. You know, especially after the end of the Cold War, we have seen what many scholars call the globalizations. And that means the very marked increase of interdependence among the nations. And since Japan is a major player in the international communities, whatever conflict takes place in a very far away part, through the network of this interdependence of the countries, we usually receive some impact, negative impact on that. For example, in case of Iraq, that's very close to the Gulf area. It's an oil-producing area. There is no doubt, no secret that Japan has been very dependent on the supply of oil, smooth supply of oil from the Gulf areas. So, even stating from the very direct economic impact, the situation in Iraq have a lot to do with the stability in the Gulf regions, and that has a lot to do with the smooth supply of stable supply of oil from the Gulf area to Japan. So we are naturally very much interested in that. But we are also interested in Africa or in East Timor, even if it's a very far away countries. We are interested in restoring peace. And that's simply because, as I said, now we are living in a very increasingly interdependent world. And even if the conflict takes place in a faraway places, that would, through this web of interdependence of countries, inevitably affect the country outside that conflict. Japan.
Since you've spoken about oil, I can't prevent myself from asking a question. How do you like the price of oil at $55 a barrel?
Well, I don't like it at all. But you know, we had oil crisis in the early part of 1970s. The impact at that time was much severer. And you can't compare the price at that time, this time, simply on an absolute basis. Yes, it has to be compared. And I think the sudden jump of the price at that time was much more disastrous, I guess.
Let me turn towards Ambassador Farhadi. Ambassador, please give us your original initial ideas, but then also comment on what has been said by Ambassador Haraguchi about the ownership of a country that is being subjected to peace building.
I think that this words of Mr. Haraguchi, sense of ownership, is very important, because if the bulk of people of a country do not have that feeling, I think that they will never be united. And also, I think that this is not the case of Japan, but the case of many other countries is Iraq or Afghanistan, or when we go to Kosovo and the surrounding lands, we find a good number of population living there, and the relation between, sometimes there is religious differences. This is mainly in the case of the Balkans,